Do you ever feel alone? Like nobody cares? Like maybe you're not worthy of love, that when people do look at you, maybe they're judging you, or when you're not in the room, they're talking about you. Today we're going to be talking about loving the lonely. And in this series, we're really expressing on what it means to be a neighbor to other people. Last week we talked about loving the needy and how poverty is really, it's kind of a mental thing. We begin to think certain ways and we repeat certain attitudes or disciplines or lack thereof. And really being lonely, being alone is another form of poverty. It's a relational poverty. It's the kind of poverty that could bring us into a crowded room and we still feel like it's us against the world. In the book of Genesis, in chapter 1, we see the story of creation. But in chapter 2, we see that after things have been created, God had a special job for Adam, the man that was formed. And it was to name all of the animals that were coming in. And so 2 by 2 they would come in, male and female, they would come in and he would name those animals. And I think that really what God was doing was working in the life of Adam. He wanted him to notice that he was insufficient on his own. And so he's naming the animals, and apparently somewhere in this he ran out of ideas and came up with things like duck-billed platypus. And so if there's names that you find are a little weird, a little off, you can just blame it on Adam, I guess. That was his job. But as the animals were coming up, at some point in there, I just kind of picture him stopping and turning to God who was there in the garden with him and saying, "Where's mine? Male, female, male, female, male, female. Where's mine?" And in Genesis 2:18, God says to Adam, "It is not good for man to be alone." Now we're not just talking about in a marriage relationship here. The reality is for any of us to be alone is not God's desire. He's created us to have connections. He's created us to experience something more. But the fact of the matter is that relational poverty has gotten to be a very big deal where people can feel alone in a crowded room. And this kind of loneliness, man, it can happen to a mom who's staying at home with her kids. Or it can happen to anybody as they're going to work and they're experiencing the hustle and bustle of an active work environment. It can happen in the loud hallways of the school. And we just experienced that a little bit with Florida. Right? The loneliness and where that can take somebody is heartbreaking. But it's not just with the poor and the needy. Right? It happens with the wealthy and the successful. How many stories have we seen come across our news feed of well-known athletes, rock stars, and actors who have seemingly made it big, but in the worst way ever have ended their battle with loneliness by taking their own life? It's a scary thing, really. But there's nothing that we're going to attain material that's ever going to deal with the poverty that we're dealing with on the inside. It again is a mindset. Right? And that kind of relational poverty, it's not just everybody else. It happens in our marriages. The place where we should be bound together, where we should encourage one another and lift each other up in the deepest sense possible, we've actually come to separate and experience great loneliness. That person, they don't understand me, or they don't get me, or we're never on the same page, and this just isn't working out. And so in this moment of intimacy where we're supposed to be together and be real with one another, we feel more alone than ever. And it happens even in our churches, where people come week in, week out, they participate in different activities, but they leave feeling lonely. And it's a shame. And I believe one of the reasons for this is because we often can lack authentic connections. People that are going to love on us, that support us, they empathize with our journey. They really are a companion that's willing to come along and walk through life with us. But more often than not, those who are lonely feel as though they can't trust anyone. That nobody really cares, and because they believe this, they're reluctant to open up. Matter of fact, they close off and they build bigger walls, which only amplifies the feeling of loneliness. I think that's one of the reasons that whenever I was given the opportunity to name this church, that I went with Connection. Because I think that there's a lot of people that are alone. A lot of people that really need authentic and growing relationships to come alongside and help them in life's journey. And I'm going to share with you some other reasons why I think that people battle loneliness, and why that maybe it impacts us even greater today than it has maybe in years gone by. Now, I get that everybody is different. Everybody is an individual, and everybody's got their own stressors, things in life. But there's 4 things, I think, in society today that really have amplified this. The first is we are a transient population. Right? We can see that right here in our own church family. Somebody will move in for a year or two, and then because of work, they move on to someplace else. So they're in and they're out. But we don't even have to move for work. We can move just because we want to. Right? Just because we like different scenery. We can move because somebody annoys us. Or we can move because we want to reset our life and start over. Lots of different reasons we can move. But it used to be that if you really wanted to move, you'd have to load up all of your possessions and stow it into a stagecoach and make a very long, very hard journey to anywhere. Now, we throw stuff in a suitcase, and in a matter of 2 hours, we're at an airport and we're ready to go anywhere in the world we want to. It's just the nature of our society, right? But what that's impacted is that our families, which used to be really close, like I grew up with most of my family in a 30-mile radius. Whenever we would get together for Sunday lunch at Grandma's house, like that was a family reunion. And now the only time that happens is when somebody dies. Right? We've split up. We've divided our families. We've divided our support network, and it's rough. Another reason I think that we battle loneliness to a greater level is because the workplace demands have amplified. Or should maybe we say the status of life has magnified. We expect that in order to be normal, in order to be average, we need to maintain a certain level of lifestyle. We need to have this or that or some other thing. And so it tells us that we don't just have to work one job, but we need 2 incomes in the house to be able to work, which we make do until we hit about kid number 2, and kid number 3 pushes it right over the edge, because now it costs more to send those children to daycare than it does just to stay home with them, and we're allowing somebody else to raise our kids, and that creates tension. Right? So we struggle with these kind of things in life because workplace demands maybe are higher. I think a third reason that we struggle with this is that the further we get along from this establishment of a free, God-fearing country, the more our morals and values decrease. And one of the main causes of poverty, whether it's relational or material, is brokenness. Right? Broken relationships with God, broken relationships with other people, broken relationships even with ourselves. And so because we've experienced this moral decay in society, then that a level of brokenness just only magnifies. As Solomon tells us in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun, and we get that. But that doesn't mean we don't create new and more ways to sin. The sins just are kind of the same. We still struggle with some of the same things that people years before us have been struggling with. But in this moral decay, it seems like it's amplified. The number of broken families, the number of dysfunctional families, the number of broken relationships at the workplace or at the school or even within our churches is just magnified. And the fourth reason, and maybe one that you would maybe not think of as being a likely candidate, is the increase in virtual relationships. They just kind of lack the depth that a real, authentic relationship would have. A face-to-face conversation instead of video gaming with the person that's just down the block in our house while they're in their house. Right? Instead of just being able to, if we get upset and frustrated and just, shut down the machine or move on to something else or move to a different game room or something like that, we just shut it off instead of working out the relationship. So there's no shortage of social media apps that you can get. I can't keep up. I'm just going to be straight up honest. I can't keep up with all the different ones that are out there. And I don't really have much desire to. There are too many other things that are asking for my attention than to try to keep up with all of that stuff that's going on. But we amplify it, don't we? Because we sit there in our loneliness, and so we throw something out on social media, and we're waiting for other people to engage, and if they don't comment or like, we feel even more alone than we did before we posted it. We just keep amplifying this level of loneliness. And that's how we play games. Like, we get online, we find a room, we start playing games with other people. We want to talk about something, instead of talking about it at work or at home, we get on a chat room. We talk about the things we like, we talk about the things we don't like, we talk about how our family's driving us nuts, or how I can't handle my workplace anymore, whatever the case. You can find a chat room for that. Right? And it's not even about just the verbal communication. Right? If you want your fix, there is no shortage of pornography on the internet. And all of these virtual, fake, just shallow relationships can overtake all the real, authentic, and growing relationships and lead us to being more alone than we were before that. And that's a hard thing maybe to take in. So how do we love on the lonely? How do we love on the people that feel alone in a crowded room, who are battling this kind of poverty? Well, I got to thinking about, who are some people that battled loneliness in the Bible? And I think the people that maybe battled loneliness the most, they were the people who had the skin disease called leprosy. Leprosy, if you contracted that, there was a very good chance that you would die within about 10 years. Right? The people didn't want to have anything to do with you because it was extremely contagious. If it was a disease that you and I were fighting today, it would be the kind of thing where these people would be put in isolation. They would be confined to this certain area. Nobody would be able to interact with them. They would have this kind of this clean zone around them. And in order to go in and interact, you would have to have a hazmat suit to go in and to interact with them. Can you imagine that level of loneliness? I think, if I'm going to be honest, it would scare me more to have to go 10 years without people interacting with me and touching me and talking with me. That would be so much worse than dying 10 years later. So much worse. It's this loneliness that just eats away. So I want to take you to a passage where we see Jesus interacting with somebody who has this leprosy. It's found in Matthew chapter 8. And it's in verses 1 through 4, page 813 if you want to follow along in the Bibles we provide. It says in Matthew chapter 8, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. There's lots of different nuances in this very short passage. The first one that I want to share with you that I think will help us to love the lonely is to listen. Is to listen. Most of us, when we think about listening, we listen with a particular purpose in mind. It's usually to fix it. Guilty. You got a problem? I want to figure that out. I want to help you get through it. Maybe it's so that you can be better. Maybe it's so that I can feel better. Maybe it's so that I can move on to the next situation. Check it off my box. Right? And so we listen in an effort to fix things. Sometimes we listen in an effort just to dismiss this situation so we can go on and do something else that we really want to do. Right? And so we're just engaged enough that we can dismiss that situation and move on to the next thing and feel like we've done a good job. Way to go, I can move on. Right? But what would have happened if you and I were to listen like we actually cared about the other person? You know, we listened with an intent to love them. We listened with an intent to encourage them. We listened with an intent to leave them better than whenever we first got together. I think it would be radically different. And I think that that's the kind of way that Jesus listened. I think Jesus listened to a deeper level, and he felt the deeper needs that were going on. He took the time to get to know a little bit more about the situation. And I think that if we were going to listen long enough, we would realize everybody's got a story. We're pretty quick to say, you know what, I got a story. And if people took the time, if they knew my life, if they knew what I've been through, if they knew the abuse that's happened to me, if they knew the choices that I've made, and you begin to rationalize all these things about your story, right? But at the same time, we build these blockades and these barricades because we don't want people in on our story because they might look at us and think about us differently or act differently towards us. And so we build these things to keep us safe, and we keep other people out and at a distance. But if we begin to realize that everybody has a story, it changes things a little bit. And what changes it even more is that every story, everybody matters to God. Get that? Everybody's story, everybody matters to God. Your story, your situation, your brokenness, your despair, your loneliness, your isolation, it matters to God. Then you and I are faced with a tough dilemma as believers in Jesus. Will we take the time to listen to other people's story, or will we be so consumed with our own that we can't possibly empathize with other people and come along on that journey? But Jesus took the time in this story to listen to what the man was saying. He said, if you will, you could heal me. And Jesus says, I can, you are healed. Right? So he heard the words and he did something about it. There was a need and he addressed it. And that's an important piece. And I think that there are some important pieces in you and I becoming good listeners. And I need this reminder on a regular basis because oftentimes I listen to fix things, and oftentimes I listen to dismiss things, and sometimes I get full of myself. Right? And so I need the reminders about how to be a good listener, how to engage with somebody else in their life, in their story, in that moment. The first thing I think is this, to provide feedback, verbal and nonverbal. That's the, okay, I hear you, I understand. Like, you're just giving the feedback. Instead of like your eyes are focused on something else that's going on over here. I do that. I'm like, hey, squirrel. And I'm over here, and this conversation's there, and they're like, I feel about this big right now. And I need those reminders that I need to come back, and I need to be engaged, and I need to nod my head and shrug my shoulders, and I need to be there, the verbal and the nonverbal communication. I need to ask questions, right? Questions like, so who was that you're talking about? When did this happen? What was taking place in that moment? So what are you going to do next? Is there a way that I can be in prayer for you? Questions go a long way to engaging that other person and to being actively invested in that relationship. How about the idea of repeating what somebody else says? Now, I get it. It can be annoying if you do this the wrong way, but if you do it the right way with an intent to show that you're engaged, it's kind of like saying, so what I hear you saying is, right? You put it into your own words and you spit it back out. They're like, oh yeah, hey, they've been paying attention. Like they were following along. They weren't thinking about how much it was going to cost to eat lunch today, or if they pushed start on the oven before they left home. And they're focused right here, and they're in the moment. Maybe seek to clarify. Hey, I'm not so sure I'm tracking with you. Can you maybe explain that a little bit more? Like, what did you mean when you said? Those are all great ways to be a better listener. And this is really hard for me to understand. But sometimes people don't want you to fix their problems. I really stink at this one. Sometimes they just want you to listen because they want to know that somebody took the time to hear them and they're not alone. Somebody took the time to hear them and they're not alone. Somebody out there cares. So the first thing we see Jesus doing when it comes to loving on the lonely is to listen to them. The second thing is to touch. Let's go back and read this again up to verse 3. And when he came down from the mountains, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and he touched him, saying, I will be clean. Part 1, Jesus listened, but Jesus listened to a deeper need. Jesus actually reached out and touched this guy who was leprous. Now let me explain that a little bit more to you. I already told you that they would die in about 10 years. It was extremely contagious, but it was so much more than that. These people were in pain, right? Their joints would hurt. The fatigue was almost unbearable. The white scaly spots that were all over their body, these like pussy welts were on their body, and they would just be nasty. And not to mention that once they got leprosy, their bodies would actually start to decompose. Have you ever smelled an animal that's rotting? It's not a pleasant smell. Like there's no amount of Axe that they can dunk themselves in to make themselves more attractive at this point. Right? It's not going to take place. And so when Jesus took the time to listen to the deeper need, he reached out his hand and he touched the very person that probably hasn't had human contact in years. That's mind-blowing. Because you and I, let's be honest, somebody catches a cold and we're wearing a mask. We're carrying around in our bags a gallon of hand sanitizer because we don't want to get that. So we go the other way. And Jesus listened for the greater need and he reached over and touched them. I want to let you in on a little something that I try to do myself. If I get called on a hospital visit, a lot of times what I try to do is take the time to listen to that person and make sure that I make contact with them physically. But what if they have a disease? Well, there's always that chance, right? But I'm going to tell you a couple precautions that I take. Number one, when I go into the hospital, hand sanitizer, right? Because I love them too much to take what's out there in there. Step number two, when I leave their room, hand sanitizer. Because I love the people out there too much to take that to them. Right? So there's some things that I do in the process of being able, to make that contact available. There's some smart things that you can take, but you and I should have contact. I know that for a lot of people, when we do the time of greeting after our first song, they feel a little maybe antsy. Right? We have some introverts that each week are trying to invent a different way that they can hide from the group during that time frame. We have some people that are new that are like, man, this is a little weird. I don't know what's going on. I don't know who these people are. Some of you guys, it's been amazing to watch because early on it was like knuckle bumps, don't really know what to do there. Then you move on to handshakes. And now I see that you're actually hugging one another. You've built some bonds and some relationships, and that's pretty cool to see. But one of the reasons that we keep that there, no matter how awkward it makes people feel, is this. That may be the only time all week that somebody's been touched. That may be the only physical contact anybody has made with them all week. And they need to feel loved. And Jesus could have healed that man without touching him. Right? Is there anybody here that would doubt that? As we read through Scripture. I mean, Jesus could have made up anything. Like, he could have told a blind guy to make a mud pie and stick in his eyes. He did that. Right? He could have invented the clapper before the clapper, like leprosy gone. Right? He could have done that. We read on the very next section, and it talks about the faith of a centurion. And so this guy, he leads troops, and he comes to Jesus, and he says, Lord, heal my servant. They're lying at home paralyzed, and he's suffering terribly. And Jesus said, I will come and I will heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof, but only by your word my servant will be healed. That's the faith part. And then we go to the end of that passage, and it says, and to the centurion Jesus said, go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. Jesus didn't even have to go to the town or enter the house, and the man was healed. Jesus listened for the deeper need, and he saw that the loneliness was a bigger issue. And so when he healed him, he reached out his hand and he touched him. Something about a loving touch that just can change everything. Number 3, and this kind of underlays everything. Love them with time. Right? Jesus wouldn't have taken the opportunity to listen if he didn't take the time to listen. And then you can go beyond that, and they would have never been touched by Jesus if he didn't take the time to be with them. And you and I have this challenge set before us. And that is that I can always make more money. I can always spend less money. I can find other ways to create margin. But when it comes to time, I have 24 hours just like anybody else. And in that same 24 hours, I'm trying to figure out how to get everything accomplished. I need to get to work. I need to pay the bills. I need to take care of the kids. I need to help out around the house, doing chores or whatever. And so we run through this list, and we've got things upon things that need to happen. And sometimes we feel like there's just not enough time in the day. And so when we give somebody our time, what that's really saying is, you are important to me. But now flip that around. When you and I go by somebody and we don't take the time for them, when we don't listen to them, when we don't touch them, what is it we're communicating? I would suggest to you we're communicating that I don't have the time to love you. You're not important enough for me to stop. Now, I know all of you well enough to know that that's not the message that you want to communicate. But I also understand that life gets chaotic and we get consumed by stuff and things. And if we look over to Mark in chapter 1 and 2, we see this same story from a different perspective, but we want to take a look at the story that comes after it as well. So it says, and the leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, if you will, you can make me clean. Moved with pity, I think that's an important line that isn't mentioned in the Matthew account. Jesus was moved by compassion. He wanted to help this guy out. He stretched out his hand and he touched him and he said to him, I will be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and it made him clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once. And he said, see that you say nothing to anyone but go. Show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them. But he went out and he began to talk freely about it, and he spread the news so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and the people were coming to him from every quarter. Okay, this guy, obviously he's been cleansed. There's some Old Testament rituals he's got to go through to present himself as being a man that's been cleaned. But now in this situation, Jesus says, don't go tell people, because then I'm not going to be able to move freely and do this ministry. But the guy, he was so excited about this new life that he had in Jesus that he went and he told everybody. And so now Jesus is locked into these remote places, yet people were continuing to come check him out. Who is this guy that heals people? And they wanted to know more about it. In chapter 2, we see the story of four guys, friends that bring their friend into Jesus. And we talked about this not that long ago, but I want to hit it from maybe a little bit different angle. So Jesus is actually invited into somebody's home. And I don't know what this looked like, this house church setting, but Jesus is there. He's teaching the people. The place is crowded, standing room only in the back. People were standing outside. And I can just picture this. And the guys show up and they've got their friend. He can't walk. And so they're trying to find a way to get him to Jesus. They can't do it. They go up the stairs on the outside of the house, get on the roof, cut a hole, drop their friend at the foot of Jesus. And now Jesus is faced with a really awkward moment and a really big dilemma. Right? Because my guess is Jesus was prepared to get up there on the stage and deliver his message and to love on the people. And now all of a sudden you can hear a pin drop and everybody's going, what's he going to do with this? And I've said it before, and I want you guys to hear it over and over again. Sometimes the greatest opportunities in life are missed because you and I view them as interruptions. And we need to find a way to see that how interruptions, if viewed properly, if given enough time, if we take the opportunity to listen, can actually be opportunities to do great things. There are so many times that I come to work on a daily basis and go, okay, by the end of the day, I want this, 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 and this accomplished. And by the end of that day, I got not that, not that, not that, and not that accomplished. But I leave feeling good about myself because somebody has interrupted my workflow and given me an opportunity to love like Jesus. Okay, and so we need to see those opportunities to love like Jesus. And so he took the time out of this busyness, right? He's standing there, people are crowded, everybody's watching, what will happen? And he heals the man, he gets up and he walks out. That's the kind of Jesus you and I serve. The kind of Jesus that wants to know your story. The kind of Jesus that says, your life matters to me enough that I'm going to take the time to be with you. I'm going to take the time to listen to you. I'm going to understand your greater needs, and I'm going to reach out and I'm going to touch you because I love you, because I care about you, and because you matter to me. That's the kind of Jesus we serve. I talked before about the hospital visits, the opportunities. Believe it or not, as I've been serving here at Connection, we've not had that many hospital visits I've been called to. But I want to share with you a little bit of my vision for the church. And I want to do so in maybe a little bit different way. If you were in the hospital for whatever sort of reason, a couple days later I found out about it, and as the pastor I show up and I come in and I pray for you and try to encourage you. That might mean a lot to you. Some of you might not mean much, right? But what would happen if you were involved in a small group and a couple days later they found out you were in the hospital and that entire group showed up at your door? And it left the nurses just frantically trying to figure out how they're going to handle this because there's only supposed to be 2 in there at a time, right? And you're supposed to be getting rest while they poke and prod and do everything else to you. And yet this rowdy group's coming in and they're joking with you and they're encouraging you and they're bringing you some sort of singing telegram and a bouquet of flowers and whatever else because they love you. I'm going to tell you, it's not that it doesn't mean something when the pastor shows up, but when you're involved in an authentic community that really cares, it makes a big difference. And so what would happen if Connection Christian Church was that authentic community? That when something was going wrong, that you couldn't keep people from showing up. That's the vision, right? That if you're involved in a ministry team, if you're serving the kiddos over there, and something happens to you and the rest of your team finds out that they're showing up to support you, that they're sending notes and cards and whatever it takes to let you know that they care and they want to walk that road for you. And it doesn't take any kind of miraculous thing for this to happen, guys. It takes for people to hit the timeout button or the pause button on life enough to view that interruption as an opportunity to invest in you, listen to you, and come alongside of you in life. I hope that we can be that kind of church. And I want you to understand this, that it'd be great if If we could just see people in need like they were in hospitals, but it doesn't always come across that way, right? Because they're sitting right here in this room. They come to church every week, and yet they're lonely. They feel like everybody is judging them, looking at them, and they've put up these walls. And it's hard to see them. They happen in our workplaces, happen with other students across the lunch table. I've come into contact with 3 high school students just in the last couple months that have had suicidal tendencies. It happens with busy moms who are locked in their homes taking care of dirty diapers. Hardworking husbands just trying to make ends meet. We need to just honestly come to God and say, God, give me the eyes to see the lonely and the hurting that are around me. God, give me the ability to have pity on them, to empathize with them, to walk that road with them, to listen and to reach out that hand and love on them. So what if you feel lonely? I want to take you to Isaiah chapter 41. The words of God through the prophet Isaiah in chapter 41, starting with verse 8. But you, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I have chosen. As you read through that, you might be thinking the nation, but this is actually God's chosen people. This is a body of people. You are my friend, you whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its farthest corners, saying to you, you are my servant. I have, there's that word again, chosen you and not cast you off. Guys, if you are feeling lonely, if you are feeling like you're in despair, if you feel like no one cares, I want you to hear these words of God. I have chosen you. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. God is there in your despair and in your loneliness. God really cares about you. He cares about you so much that He sent His one and only Son here to die for you. And not just to die for you, but He sent Him here because He will take the time out to listen and to care for you. Right? He wants to bring you in. You are not alone in this situation. And the church is meant to be God's tool, as an extension to love on people. So we care too. Right? We're here, the ability to exercise the one another's in life, to love one another, encourage one another, support one another, pray for one another. All of these things are meant to be lived out in the church, but we've got to bring the walls down and we've got to have the eyes to see the needs and actually take the time to hit the pause button and engage in life with other people. We mentioned our core values last week. So when somebody's dealing with material poverty, that you love on them, right? And you love them enough to serve them. You come down right next to them and you walk this road with them, not as somebody who is elevated coming low, because you're not any higher. You too are broken and you're coming along somebody else who's broken, and you want them to know that you love on them and you encourage them and you come right next to them. They already have a Savior. We're not it. And then we connect them with God, God's Word, and God's people, and can see them grow in life. The same thing happens with relational poverty. We love other people because they matter, right? They matter to God. Their story matters to God. It sure as heck might as well matter to us, right? We care about other people, and we want other people to care about us. And that's an important piece. And when we do, we start serving one another. We take the time to become less so that somebody else can become more. We build them up. And we do so, we connect them with God, because God is the only one through Jesus who heals the brokenness and the brokenhearted. And when we do that, we're going to see people grow and become more about who God has created them to be. And so what's your next step? Maybe it's to listen to somebody else's drama at work. Maybe it's to listen to the story of a struggling teen across the lunch table. Maybe it's to take time out of your life to visit with those who are in a nursing facility that need to be loved on. And maybe it's to offer a friendly touch that's going to comfort somebody who's dealing with life's difficulties. Whatever the case is, I know that we all need to pray about this, because we can pray first. So our prayer first challenge is, God, give me the eyes to see the lonely and hurting. God, give me the compassion for those who are lonely. Help me to see how I can come alongside of them and help them in this process.